60 miles per hour, although it will be breezy elsewhere. Very mild, 11, 12, 13 degrees Celsius. But that rain in the northwest of Scotland, well, that just keeps on coming because this weather front here essentially becomes stranded, stuck in this broad westerly flow of winds. So quite a lot of rain in the northwest of Scotland heading into Monday and Tuesday. That could give some issues with flooding. Further south, higher pressure, so more in the way of dry weather. Still a lot of clouds and bits and pieces of rain. And certainly for the first half of the week, it stays very mild.
I define populism as exploiting a grievance rather than solving it, as riding the anger rather than providing the answer.
Whatever time of night Dave couldn't sleep at night, you go in the studio and you just create music, put something down if you had an idea.
I think every athlete goes through their end of their career in a very different way.
When big names talk, they talk to us.
Get the BBC News app for breaking news live as it happens. Personalise the app to get your news your way. From local stories to global headlines. Stay up to date with the news that matters. BBC News. Download the app.
At 10, the Prince and the alleged Chinese spy. The Duke of York maintains he met the man through official channels and nothing of a sensitive nature was ever discussed. Some believe this was an audacious bid by the Chinese state to infiltrate the very top of British society. Dominic Casciani has the very latest.
Clive, was this an attempted elite capture, an operation to embed an agent inside the royal family?
We've got Officer Venus rolling here.
Also tonight, after the summer riots, police officers revealed for the very first time the nightmare of those dark days. In Syria, tens of thousands take to the streets to celebrate the downfall of the Assad regime.
We are feeling the feeling of free. We never were free like this.
I want all the world to see us. We are free now.
We are free now.
And Argentina took the prize last time. Now the new World Cup qualifying rounds have been announced. What are your team's chances?
On Newsnight at 10:30 tonight, we'll bring you fresh insight on the stories of the day with big interviews and our regular panel of Newsnighters. And of course, look at what the papers are saying about tomorrow's news.
Good evening. Prince Andrew says he ceased all contact with a Chinese businessman who's been banned from the UK, accused of being a spy. In a statement this evening, the Prince said he'd met the individual through official channels with nothing of a sensitive nature ever being discussed, and he's now acted on the advice of the government after concerns were raised. China has condemned the decision to ban the businessman who's been described as a close confidant of the Duke's and who received an invitation to the Prince's birthday party in 2020. He'd also been told he could act on behalf of the Prince when dealing with potential investors in China. Dominic Casciani has our top story.
A prince under pressure again, this time over his relationship with a mystery businessman we're not allowed to name, now revealed by the courts to be a likely spy targeting the royal family. For 10 years, Prince Andrew promoted the UK's relationship with China. This was his pitch at the Palace investment scheme on tour in China. From entrepreneurs to state visits, Here with China's President Xi Jinping, the Duke forged closer ties amid a delicate and difficult diplomatic relationship. That relationship is now under new strain. A judgment from the semi-secret Special Immigration Appeals Commission has revealed that a man working for the Chinese Communist Party's intelligence operations has been banned from the UK. He'd targeted the Duke in an operation to influence him. In 2020, H6 became a close confidant with an unusual degree of trust, working with this man, the Duke's advisor, Dominic Hampshire. He gave H6 the green light to act for the Duke in talks with Chinese investors. When the security services became suspicious and searched H6's phone, they found evidence he was a state agent, a conclusion that doesn't surprise experts.
Typically, they would go for members of the House of Lords or prominent business people or people who, have a voice in a community. It's quite ambitious to target a member of the royal family and quite unwise for a member of the royal family to allow himself to be targeted.
The court found that H6 had been in a position to generate relationships with prominent UK figures, which could be leveraged for political interference purposes. There was a letter from Dominic Hampshire on the phone. He told H6 that, outside of the Prince's closest internal confidence, you sit at the very top of a tree that many, many people would like to be on. H6 also had a note of how to handle the Duke himself. It said, important, manage expectations. Really important to not set too high expectations. He is in a desperate situation and will grab onto anything. Counter-espionage investigators feared the Duke had been the target of elite capture. That's the Chinese Communist Party's operation to seek influence across British life. And so the Home Secretary used her exceptional powers, reserved for the most serious national security cases, to ban the businessman from the UK. MI5's chief has repeatedly warned of the scale of China's information and intelligence gathering in the UK.
We see the Chinese authorities playing the long game in cultivating contacts to manipulate opinion in China's favour, seeking to co-opt and influence not just prominent parliamentarians from across the political landscape, but people much earlier in their careers and public life, gradually building a debt of obligation.
There's no suggestion Mr Hampshire was aware of H6's objective, and the Chinese embassy has called the allegations a baseless smear.
It was his
As for Prince Andrew, he withdrew from public life after his Newsnight interview over his relationship with the now dead sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. That relationship raised questions of judgment, and now another relationship has led to more.
Dominic, the Prince made his first comments on all of this just in the last few hours. What exactly did he say?
Yeah, well, this is a statement from his office, Clive. It says that the Duke of York has ceased all contact with the businessman after he received advice from the government. After these concerns were raised, the Duke had met the individual through official channels with nothing of a sensitive nature ever discussed. And then there's a thing at the bottom of the statement that says he can't discuss national security matters. That's his statement. So in essence, he's saying, look, when I was told about this, I cut the ties.
But these are highly sensitive issues. Someone at the very highest level must have decided that all this should come out and be made public.
Yeah, this is really quite often a difficult calculation within the security services world. They want most of their operations to stay discreet and private and confidential, because by definition, if you keep them private and confidential, then you're reducing the risk that your enemies know what you're trying to achieve. So, there is a necessity to that. But sometimes, in some situations, the security services feel they have no choice but to basically ask the Home Secretary to hit a great big button called banning order. And in this case, they felt that this is in the judgment that the best option to deal with this individual, known only as H6, was to ask the Home Secretary to exclude him from the UK because he was a threat to national security. And because they took that decision, or rather the Home Secretary took that decision on advice, it meant it was going to come out in courts if he appealed, and that's what he's done. You get this public disclosure of the case, his complaints that he is an innocent victim in all of it, but it puts it out there. And of course, that's damaging to the Prince because this is out there. There's something else which has happened tonight, which is a report in the Times, which we haven't been able to corroborate yet. But the Times is reporting that the individual was allowed to visit Buckingham Palace along with Prince Andrew and Windsor Castle. Now, we know that he went to the Prince's birthday party a few years ago, but we don't know whether or not he had these further visits. But that raises the question about how far he got into effectively the heart of the British establishment.
Sure. OK. Dominic, thank you. Dominic Casciani there. Now, for the first time, frontline police officers have spoken to the BBC about the personal impact of this summer's riots. Officers from Cleveland Police say Middlesbrough felt like a war zone on one of the worst days of violence. That was August the 4th. Now, some told us they thought they'd be killed. This special report from Ed Thomas includes footage and radio communications given to us by the police from that very day.
I was screaming at them, hold the line, and they were there with a shield with people trying to set them on fire, and you know what I mean? It was just horrific.
And they smashed every car window regardless of race, colour. They were just on a rampage.
Rocks, bricks, burning bins, absolute carnage.
For the first time, frontline officers
Switchline PSU, come on!
talk about the emotional and physical impact of policing this summer's riots.
We've got officers being assaulted here, punches to the face.
In Middlesbrough, 1,000 protesters faced off with around 125 officers.
We need more units out.
People offering money to burn police cars out.
We just couldn't hold the line. They were just pushing forward with such force.
Rallying calls of we need to arm ourselves, and if the police try and stop us, we're going to go over the top of them.
On the ground, Chief Inspector Zoe Kelsey was outnumbered and under pressure.
Zoe, hold the line where you're at.
Talk about the thin blue line, and it was very thin on that day. It really was.
We need some units here on the right flank. They're just coming past our cops. Dozens of them.
Extra officers from Yorkshire and Northumbria were rushed in to boost numbers.
It's like being in a war zone for 8 hours, but you've just got a shield and a stick.
Whoa!
Streets trashed, shops looted.
These guys are literally lighting up a bin.
Rioters even tried to set officers on fire.
So what's the reason for the bin? For the police?
Yeah, light on fire, shine.
So every time the wheelie bin went in, that was set on fire. The cheers were there.
If someone got like a brick here in the face, it would be like, yay! They saw that we represented law and order, the government, and that's what they were fighting. I don't think they stopped to think that we were humans behind that uniform.
After 2 hours of relentless battles,
We've got an officer who's down.
a police officer collapsed.
Potential heart attack. Need an ambulance urgently.
Over the radio, we heard someone say something about a heart attack. When this was happening, we were in the middle of one of the streets, like fighting again with our shields and going forward and having things thrown at us.
We're coming with a defib.
He's on the floor. He's laid in his pants and socks. And there's 2 officers there, sort of working on him.
Zoe was one of them.
Cut all his pads off him and his clothes and put the defib things on him. I was just holding his hand and I was just saying, you're going to be all right, you're going to be all right. And it was awful. I didn't think he was going to make it.
My mind had gone, I would say, for that short period of time.
That night I went home, I couldn't sleep at all. And I couldn't sleep, and I didn't know if he was dead or alive or... And luckily he's on my Facebook, so I rang him in the morning and he answered, and I felt so much better when I heard it. So yeah, he's okay.
In Middlesbrough, children took part in the violence. Chaos live streamed on social media. On this crossroads, a roadblock was set up.
Are you white? Are you white actually mental?
The rioter in the red t-shirt and scarf, now jailed, is asking drivers if they are white. Homes trashed, filmed for likes and clicks on social media.
These are the people that draw everything out of the community, draw the life and soul out of the community, give nothing but take everything. The people that commit the antisocial behaviour, the hardcore element of this disruptive group, were them people.
How do you describe them?
Personally, parasites. I think society needs personal opinion to have a good look at itself because they have created what we're suffering now.
a town under siege.
It's got bags of bricks, they're arming themselves.
Anger and violence repeated across the country. Officers left injured and traumatised.
I didn't sleep for months after. Couldn't sleep.
I went on holiday with my family. I think it was probably day 2 or day 3. I just felt as though I just sort of hit the floor, if you like. Felt as though I could have just broke down, to be honest.
It was really traumatic for everyone involved, really traumatic.
Can you cope with doing all that again?
Yes. Don't even need to think about that one. Am I ready? Am the officers ready? Yeah.
Ed Thomas there with that special report. Now, tens of thousands of Syrians have been on the streets of towns and cities right across the country, including the capital, Damascus, to celebrate the overthrow of the Assad regime. Such scenes were unthinkable just a week ago. Today saw the first Friday prayers since rebel groups took power in the country, after which people were urged to go out and express their joy. Jeremy Bowen has more from Damascus.
This ancient city has seen countless upheavals over 5 millennia. For modern Syria, though, with its old flag restored, nothing matches the fall of the Assads. The end of the first week without an Assad in charge since 1970 brought thousands of Syrians into the Umayyad Mosque to thank God for their deliverance. The chant is, "The people want the execution of Bashar." The regime's collapse and liberation from Assad's brutal security state are powering a sense of great optimism.
For all the people here, this puts the seal on it. This is absolute proof that they have won and the regime has gone. Just flying one of these black, white and green flags a couple of weeks ago could have got you arrested, jail time, or even a bullet.
The fighters of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, are still basking in their achievement. That white flag, used by Syrian Islamist fighters, was also behind the new Prime Minister in a broadcast. HTS insists it's renounced its former extremist ideology. Some Syrians do not believe them. Samir, overwhelmed, back from Britain after 44 years, is hoping for a tolerant future.
This is our country. This is not Al-Assad country. He's gone now. I don't know how we are going to rebuild it. He has been corrupting this country for 50 years, but this is the people that was going to build the country. So wish us the luck, everyone in the world. And please, please, leave us alone. Leave us alone, okay? We appreciate your support, but we don't want anyone to interfere with our decisions, what we are going to do. This is their decision.
Syria's future is full of challenges. HTS is an Islamist group. What will that mean for girls and for women? How do Syrians get justice for the regime's crimes? They meant it when they called for Bashar's execution before the prayer. Their new rulers told them to celebrate the Blessed Revolution, so they did. Syrians understand that it won't be easy to overcome 50 years of dictatorship and 14 years of war. But this was a day to seize and enjoy. Thousands converged on Umayyad Square in the center of Damascus. It's as if an enormous weight has been lifted off a nation. I have never seen so many smiling people in Syria.
We are free. We are feeling. We are free. We are feeling the feeling of free. We never were free like this.
I want all the world to see us. We are free now.
We are free now.
And where are the south, north? We are free.
The fighters at the Heroes now, bringing their kids, posing for photos with other people's. But when the party's over, people need to eat in an economy smashed by war and corruption. I asked Ibdi Halaunot and her daughters what they need.
Just needed freedom to do. No taxes, no stolen money taken from us.
Just we want to be independent. We want to be an independent people. Syria is an independent country. Nobody controls us. Nobody can rule us, but just the Syrians themselves.
It's too soon for firm answers to Syria's problems, but the placards set an agenda. Bring the Assads to justice, civil rights for all, and Syria is for every Syrian, no matter who they are. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Damascus.
And America's top diplomat, Antony Blinken, says he'll work to prevent a resurgence of the Islamic State group in Syria following the collapse of the Assad regime. He made an unannounced visit to Iraq today, where he met the Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani in Baghdad. After their talks, Mr. Blinken said Iraq understood the dangers of a revitalized IS more than any other country. And there'll be more on Syria shortly on Newsnight over on BBC Two with Faisal. Hi there.
Hi Clive, scenes of chaos and jubilation in Syria tonight as those crowds celebrate the end of the Assad regime. But what does their future hold? We speak to the former UK Foreign Secretary and a woman who desperately hopes her father, missing in Syria since 2017, will be found. Newsnight in about 15 minutes on BBC Two, BBC News and iPlayer.
Thanks, Faisal. In Gaza, the health ministry says more than 80 people have been killed in Israeli strikes in the past day alone as international efforts to secure a ceasefire continue. In Jabalia, in northern Gaza, a surgeon was shot dead as he travelled from one hospital to another. The Israeli military says it's investigating what happened. Israel doesn't allow journalists unrestricted access to Gaza. John Donnison has more from Jerusalem.
Already injured in a previous attack, this is Dr. Saeed Judah speaking last month, reported to be the last orthopaedic surgeon in northern Gaza. A grandfather who came out of retirement to help during the war. Save us, it says on the placard. It didn't work.
On his way to Al Auda hospital to evaluate a patient, one of the tanks fired on Dr. Sayed directly. Unfortunately, he was killed instantly.
Some witnesses say he was shot by a drone. The Israeli military says it's investigating. This is the Kamal Adwan hospital in northern Gaza, where Dr. Judah did much of his work. It has few supplies, few doctors, but endless patients. The area in Jabalia has been under siege and under bombardment by Israeli forces for months, in an effort, they say, to stop Hamas from regrouping. Israel does not allow foreign journalists unrestricted access to Gaza.
They're coming under continued bombardment in these hospitals.
But from Jerusalem, I got through to the main United Nations aid agency there.
It's devastating for his family. It's devastating for people in the north who are relying on so few doctors and such few resources available. Hospitals in the Gaza Strip are not hospitals anymore. They keep using this term partially functioning, but if you and I were to step in these hospitals, you wouldn't recognize anything about it to resemble a hospital. There is no sanitation. There are hardly any doctors. There's no medical equipment. Patients are dying needlessly.
Much of northern Gaza is an apocalyptic wasteland, but Israel's offensive is not over. John Donnison, BBC News, Jerusalem.
The UK economy shrank for the second month in a row in October by 0.1%. The hospitality and retail sectors were weak. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, described the figures as disappointing, while the Conservatives say it's her budget that's to blame for crashing the economy. Here's Darshini David.
There is a budget coming in October, and it's going to be painful.
Was it this thorny comment from the Prime Minister back in Downing Street's Rose Garden in August that sent an autumn chill across the economy? As pre-budget anxiety took hold, the recovery unravelled for many businesses in October, including this menswear retailer in Hitchin.
We're starting to see, in the winter, and we've had a change of government, budgets have changed, and it's got tougher and tougher. And we just want to hear more good news, not bad news.
Well, that chill was widespread, denting retail, manufacturing and construction, meaning the economy shrank by 0.1% in October. And look back at our monthly performance. Our growth has run out of steam since the start of the year. Our income, or GDP, is slightly smaller than when Labour took office. The Chancellor has admitted that's disappointing and says she hopes people will feel better off soon. The government's targeting boosting living standards or income. Official projections suggest we're each likely to be £300 better off by 2030 after inflation. That, however, would be the second worst performance of any parliament. While the Chancellor hopes that the £70 billion extra poured into public services and investment by 2030 will boost fortunes, there are growing fears that her £40 billion of tax rises will hit the private sector through wage growth, jobs, profits and prices harder than expected.
It's not possible to turn around more than a decade of poor economic growth and stagnant living standards in just a few months.
This government's constant talking down of the UK economy is coming through in these numbers. And so it's no surprise that businesses right up and down the country are now sounding the alarm.
Economists warn it could be a flat festive season, with businesses tightening their belts ahead of those tax rises and wary of risks, including a possible trade war with America. The challenge is to raise our game as we go into 2025. Darshini David, BBC News.
2 men have been arrested after a Christmas fairground ride crashed to the ground in Birmingham last night. 2 women on the City Star flyer needed hospital treatment, while another 11 people were treated at the scene. The men, aged 55 and 21, are being questioned on suspicion of perverting the course of justice and obstructing officers. Royal Mail has been fined £10.5 million for delivering millions of items late. The regulator, Ofcom, said the poor service was eroding public trust in one of the UK's oldest institutions. The fine is nearly double the penalty paid by the company last year. Royal Mail says it's carried out substantial reforms. A coroner has ruled that a former British paratrooper who travelled to Ukraine to help the war effort was unlawfully killed by a man fighting on the same side. A post-mortem examination found Daniel Burke, who was 36 and from Manchester, died from multiple gunshot wounds. His killer, who is of Algerian and Australian nationality, is now on the run, having told Ukrainian police he shot Daniel Burke while the pair were practicing drills.
The way Dan's life was taken was a cowardly act. So many unanswered questions. The man in question has admitted murder, but still no action from the Ukrainian or Australian authorities. He didn't deserve to go out like this.
This festive season, there's a new warning for people to be careful with their phones when using public transport. The BBC has learnt that robberies and thefts on trains and at stations in England, Scotland and Wales have nearly trebled since 2018. Sean Dilley was granted rare access to the plainclothes police officers targeting phone snatchers.
Captured. These suspected phone snatchers are coming in. They were seen wearing balaclavas, forcing their way through ticket gates. Officers searched the men and found an expensive smartphone.
It's wrapped up in tinfoil to try and block the signal so it can't be located or traced for the stolen items.
It's a great result for the Violent Crime Task Force.
How good does it feel when you catch a phone snatcher?
It's a good feeling because loads of phone snatches and phone thefts happen up and down the network every day. And when you do actually get one, it's a little win for the team, and also hopefully a victim can be reunited with a phone because they're not cheap.
The majority of thefts and robberies are reported in London, but outside the capital, the areas with the next most reported crimes are Birmingham, Kent, Essex and Manchester, with offences taking place across the network in England, Wales and Scotland. Niall McNamee had his phone snatched on the 15th of October.
Just as the doors are about to close at Oval Station where we are, my phone was just swiped out of my hand and the doors closed.
The thieves cracked his passcode, plundered his online bank accounts and used his details to apply for a personal loan. All told, they stole £21,000.
My phone was nicked. I had no idea that they were going to take all that money and take out a loan. For some reason, it's a big violation.
No suspect has been identified and Niall's case has been closed. Back with the Violent Crime Task Force, the 2 arrested men have been linked with an earlier robbery. Police advice is, if you must have your phone out, always pay attention to your surroundings. Look around you and don't make it easy for robbers and thieves. Sean Dilley, BBC News.
The home nations have found out whom they'll be taking on in the qualifying rounds for the Men's 2026 Football World Cup, which is being held in the United States, Mexico and Canada. Natalie Perks has more on the draw.
Each World Cup claims to be the biggest, but 2026 will be. A record 48 teams will compete, and a record 16 of them will be from Europe.
He's missed it! Oh my.
England fell at the quarter-finals in Qatar, but now Thomas Tuchel has the reins.
England.
Whilst England will be the favourites in Group K, the new boss says there's no such thing as a done deal.
The smaller nations become stronger and stronger, so we have to earn our place, we have to earn our top spot, of course.
It's been 26 years since Scotland's men last made it to football's biggest stage. The Tartan Army will be hoping for more of this when they face either Portugal or Denmark, a resurgent Greece and Belarus from September. Qatar was only Wales's second World Cup in history. A group stage exit there means unfinished business. But under new management, they're in good form. They'll have to put the miles in, though. It's an 8-hour-plus flight to Kazakhstan.
Northern Ireland.
And Michael O'Neill's men have been handed a mouth-watering, albeit tricky tie, against four-time winners Germany or Italy.
Oh, and he's now slipped.
Not since 1986 has the Green and White Army descended on a World Cup, but their manager is optimistic of at least making the playoffs.
When you get drawn with Germany or Italy, it's always a difficult one to imagine that you can top the group. But obviously, we look at Slovakia and Luxembourg, and we would believe that we could challenge to finish second in the group.
No second place for Saudi Arabia this week. FIFA handed them 2034 World Cup hosting duties as the sole bidders. Despite concerns around human rights records, the home nations all backed the kingdom's bid.
It wasn't a difficult decision. I think it was a very thorough process. We spent a lot of time with the Saudis, understanding their approach to the tournament. We asked a lot of questions. They gave us a lot of time. And they gave us a lot of commitments.
Good luck to you all, and we'll see you there. World Cup qualifiers look set to be a more competitive process. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
What's the forecast for the weekend's weather? Chris is here. Hi there.
Well, Clive, it was a pretty spectacular end to what has been quite a drab day, really. This was a fantastic sunset picture from the Highlands of Scotland. I love it because this is actually illuminating a retreating cold front. This cold front, and it's this that's going to be moving southwards. It's responsible for breaking up the clouds, so there'll be a little bit more sunshine than we've been used to so far this week tomorrow. At the moment, the cold front is just around southern Scotland, but it continues to push southwards. Ahead of that, across England and Wales, it's another drab night. A lot of low cloud, some mist, some hill fog patches, some drizzle, kind of like it's been for the last few nights. For most, it's a cold night, but frost-free, 2 to 4 degrees, but there will be some patches of frost in Scotland by the end of the night. Look at the cloud melt away across East Anglia and southern England, the drizzle clearing away as that cold front pushes through. We'll get the sunshine coming out for a time, but then into the afternoon, for Scotland and for Northern Ireland, it turns cloudier and we'll start to see outbreaks of rain moving in here. It will be quite chilly across these eastern areas, temperatures around 5 to 7, East Scotland, Eastern England. The mildest weather, Stornoway, dipping out a toe into this milder air, which is coming our way. And through Saturday night, it's one of those nights where temperatures will actually rise through the night as this milder air works in. And for Sunday, it'll be a completely different feel to the weather, definitely a weekend of two halves. A lot of cloud around, mind you, so with a few spots of rain around western coast and hills. Heavier rain, though, setting up in western Scotland. A few breaks in the cloud elsewhere towards the south and east with a little bit of hazy sunshine. But wherever you are, it is going to be mild. Those temperatures coming up well above average, 12 or 13 degrees. We've not seen anything like this, really, through much of this week. Now, beyond that, the milder air is here to stay into the early part of next week, but so too is the rain in the Highlands of Scotland, and that could bring the risk of some localised flooding here. And then into the run-up to Christmas, it's going to get very changeable. One day cold, the next mild, then cold, then mild. All the while, it looks like it's going to be quite unsettled in the run-up to Christmas. Clive.
All right, retreating cold fronts, that's what I want to hear. Chris, thank you. That's it. Now on BBC One, time to join our colleagues for all the news where you are. Have a very good night.
And if you want to continue watching the BBC News at 10, please turn over to BBC One, or you can watch on iPlayer. Next, it's Newsnight.
In Syria tonight, thousands take to the streets to celebrate the end of the Assad regime. We asked the former UK Foreign Secretary what next for the region, for diplomacy and for millions of refugees around Europe. And the government says its central mission is economic growth. Unfortunate then that there's been none since the election. If this continues, are there further tough decisions ahead? Good evening, this is Newsnight, brought to you live every weeknight from Broadcasting House with the best insights and interviews. Tonight, thousands of Syrians pour onto the streets to celebrate the fall of the Assad regime. The mass rallies took place after the first Friday prayers since Hayat Tahrir al-Sham took control of the capital city last weekend. Here's a reminder of what's happened in just a matter of days.
Peace signs. They're saying that life is going to be so much better now that Bashar al-Assad is gone.
Revolution won after 14 years. We just want justice.
A historic moment in every sense of the word. Ahmed al-Shara Abu Muhammad al-Julani here for the first time in the great Umayyad Mosque.
He didn't seem to be a guy who'd be at home in a torture centre. But he certainly seemed to be a guy who'd be very happy giving the orders to get people tortured and killed.
The rebels went straight to a notorious prison to set the inmates free.
Extraordinary scenes, and in a minute I'll be speaking to General Secretary of the University and College Union Joe Grady and the former advisor to then Prime Minister Boris Johnson Samuel Kasumu about UK policy on the situation in Syria, as well as about a busy week in British politics. But first, let's speak to Mariam Kam Almas. She's a Syrian American whose father was abducted by the regime whilst visiting his home country in 2017. Thank you so much for joining us, Mariam. What are you doing right now to find out the truth about your father?
We have family members in Damascus right now searching for him within the prisons, within the hospitals, searching within documents to find any form of evidence or proof or life if he's still alive. We're really trying all that we can to find out what happened to him and where he is. We've been in the unknown for nearly 8 years now, not knowing exactly what happened to him.
And there are hundreds, thousands maybe of families in the same position as you right now.
Absolutely. When I am hearing all of these stories that are coming out of the horrible prisons, there are people that have been there for 30, 40 years. I feel like 8 years is actually very short compared to all of these people. But I can't say that these 8 years haven't felt like 100 years. They have been the most horrible 8 years of our lives. We've felt every single minute of them, living in the unknown, not knowing his fate. And then to presume he might have been killed by the Syrian regime. The U.S. government had told us that he was murdered by them, but yet we have no proof of any DNA or a body or any of that sort. And we're hearing now stories of loved ones that were declared dead and their families received death certificates, but yet the family members were able to come out alive, and that renewed our hope. That made us believe there's a chance our father could still be alive. It could be all a misunderstanding. The Syrian regime is very notorious and very corrupt, and they will allow people to be in the unknown forever. You can think your family member is passed and they'll be alive, or you can believe your family member is alive and they'll be dead. And it's unfortunate, and it's very sad, and it's corrupt to play with families in this way. It's corrupt to have families searching for their loved ones for so long and in the unknown.
So Mariam, but this is a very sort of fraught situation right now. You're just trying to find out what information you can, and you get some occasionally incorrect information. You were told that there was maybe a body, but that hasn't proven to be the case. Is that the situation?
What happened is that there was an image of an individual that was circulating online. He was in a hospital and his family wasn't coming to pick him up. And he resembled my father in a particular video to the point where it fooled me. I was convinced that was my father. And as soon as I saw it, my heart dropped. My father's alive. I have to get to him. Yet the condition of this individual was horrific. He was nonverbal, couldn't remember his name. He was unable to communicate with the hospital staff. They didn't know who his family was or what to do with him. And he was burned from top to bottom. His foot was severely damaged. So there was a lot of issues that were wrong with him, and it was just so devastating. Regardless, it turns out it wasn't my father, as another family ended up coming to pick him up, and we learned it was not him. We were hoping to get some DNA testing done, since he resembled him so much, but there were some differences, and we thought maybe within time of being in prison for so long, his features changed and altered a little bit. But we only came to find out that it was another individual. Their family showed up and picked them up, and it was not my father.
So a very confusing picture at a very delicate time,
Right.
and you have this difficult personal quest, and yet at the same time, your country, your parents' country, after decades, is finally free of the Assad tyranny.
Yes, and that is worth celebrating. It's an absolutely bittersweet time where we want to celebrate, but yet we are witnessing such horrific crimes that it's weighing on us as well. For me, I want to be happy, but I can't take it in completely, watching all of these horrible pictures and videos that are coming out of all of these prisons where so many people are brutally killed. And I've seen videos of those that are burned and placed into bags and thrown into mass graves. It's just a crazy time. It's hard to enjoy and yet mourn those that have passed.
And so, Mariam, just when the last time you saw him was in 2017, and right now today, amid all this tumult, you're holding out hope that you might see him again.
Absolutely. We're still hopeful. We haven't reached any conclusion yet, any concrete evidence that he's actually passed. We don't have any DNA or a body yet. So we're going to stay hopeful that, we can somehow find him still alive. There are still locations that are still hidden that they still need to get to. So we never know. We're holding out for now. We're still excited and anticipating a chance to still see him again.
Mariam, thanks so much for joining us there with that extraordinary story of trying to deal with the aftermath of the situation. Thanks so much there.
Thank you.
Well, Joe, there's not just that story, there's also the extraordinary story of the American that we thought was somebody that turned out to be someone that we didn't even know had been kidnapped in Syria turning up. I mean, what do you make of all this from a personal sense?
It's an unimaginable reality, and I think, we've just heard Mariam, and whilst it's really nice to see scenes of celebration on the streets of Damascus, this is the other side of the reality that is going to become more apparent, and I think it makes it even more clear why we need to make sure that we are supporting the people of Syria, that we are helping them transition into democracy, and that we are supporting them to get justice.
Yeah, Sam, and then in political terms, there's been some cabinet tensions over Labour's history in this Syria argument today.
Yeah, of course. If we go back to 2013, there was a so-called red line that Assad crossed using chemical weapons, and to a large extent, nothing was done about that. And then he went on to use reported chemical weapons at least 85 times on the people of Syria. Now, of course, the backdrop of that and the tension between West Streeton and Ed Miliband was that in 2013 there was less of a desire for political intervention because of Afghanistan and Iraq. And so this tension today is around saying, well, in hindsight, should we have done more to intervene in 2013? And I mean, I can understand West Streeton's perspective, which is that, more should have been done. But I think it's easier to say that today. And also you must throw into the mix the reality of what has happened in some of the countries where there was interventions. We've seen things like the rise of ISIS in some countries as well during those periods. So I don't think it's as black and white as these tensions playing out would suggest. The situation is complicated, and hindsight, of course, is 2020.
It was interesting to have that between two cabinet ministers there, wasn't it? And actually, I think Streeting put out some social media saying, well, actually his argument was more nuanced than that. But talking of Miliband, just before we came on air, I spoke to David Miliband, the former UK Foreign Secretary and now the head of humanitarian organisation, the International Rescue Committee. I asked him about the refugees, about the sheer speed of geopolitical changes, but started by asking what it was like for his NGO to work alongside HTS in that part of northwest Syria it controlled before the fall of the Assad regime.
Well, we've been working in the northwest of Syria as well as the northeast. The northeast is Kurdish controlled, as you know. The northwest, we've had about 450 staff there, over 400 staff for the last 12 years. And the HTS group, along with a range of other non-state armed groups, have been in control of that territory. The way it works is that there is a civilian administration that liaises with NGOs like ours. And the simple truth is that we've been able to get on with our work on behalf of the 3.5 to 4 million people who are living in the northwest of Syria over the last 12 years without interference. We haven't been told you can serve this community, you can't serve that community. We've been able to ensure that the aid reaches those that it's intended for. And to that extent, it's been a professional and well-organized humanitarian response, including under the extreme conditions after the earthquake in February 2023. So in that sense, the model that's been created in the Northwest for engagement with the outside world has, I think, been a positive one.
And so from your perspective, do you think the international community should lift the terrorist designation currently given to HTS?
I think that the first priority is to make sure that order is established, that the currency doesn't submit to hyperinflation, the economy doesn't submit to hyperinflation, that the border crossings are opened, and that the health system is sustained. Those are all essential to any kind of stability. Then a government needs to be formed, an inclusive government that matches the actions with words. We're always in favour of engagement with any authority. There are 42, we published this week our emergency watch list of countries that are in trouble, humanitarian trouble for 2025. In those countries, there are 42 different non-state actors in varying degrees of control. And so our message is always engage with those non-state actors, because that's our job, our humanitarian job. We never get into the question of whether or not a country should lift or not its terrorist designation. That's obviously something for the politicians, the ministers in the different countries. What we would say is that engagement has proved its worth.
Are you hopeful for the future of Syria now that Assad has gone?
I'm much more hopeful than I was 2 weeks ago. I have to temper that because I know how much danger there is ahead, how things could go wrong when a state collapses in the way that it has over the last 2 weeks. There's all sorts of dangers. But the truth is, if I spoke to our Syrian staff, our Syrian clients, whether in Syria or in Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey, where there are millions of them, or in Germany or the UK, where there are far fewer, about 17,000 Syrians in the UK. The truth is, the time when they smile is when you say, do you think you'll ever go back? And it's a country of great pride and, until recently, very little hope. And so I think that one has to say there's a flame of hope alive at the moment. But of course, there's enormous room for this to go wrong. And one's got to just try and do everything one can in one's own small way to contribute to the stability, the inclusion, the pluralism that's going to be essential for Syria's future and for the future of all Syrians.
What do you think about those flows of refugees? Obviously, it stoked big political issues around Europe, in continental Europe and also here in the UK. And right now, there's a pause on asylum applications in the major European nations.
Well, you can understand why it's impossible for anyone to make a determination of an asylum claim at the moment, because it's unclear whether or not Syria is going to be safe to go back. What we say is that all of our experience, as well as humanitarian principles, are that returns should be voluntary and they should be safe. Now, there are a lot of people going back, as well as both from cross-border, notably from Lebanon, but also from Jordan. And there are also people going back to their homes from within Syria. In terms of further afield, everything that I'm hearing is that Syrian people are looking at their options. They don't yet know how things are going to shake out. But if they shake out well, if there is an inclusive government, if there is a modicum of stability, if there is a chance to rebuild the country, I think refugees are going to want to go home.
I mean, something extraordinary geopolitically seems to have happened here, the consequences of which we can not possibly know right now.
I think that it's been a week in which a decade has happened. And we've always been of the view that to take the Syrian case, the people who said the war was over, Assad has won, we always said they were wrong. The truth is, this has not been made by America, China or Russia, the three biggest players in the global scene. It's been made by a non-state actor or a set of non-state actors in Syria. It's been made by Turkey. It has enormous implications. It's been made in part by the Israeli action against Hezbollah in Lebanon. And it obviously has enormous implications for Iran, which has suffered a very significant setback. In that sense, it's the new model of geopolitics that is multi-aligned, not just multipolar, with medium-sized states and non-state actors having outsized influence.
There is an attempt, there's a move towards Britain under a Labour government, perhaps trying to row back some of the China hawkishness we saw under the Conservatives, perhaps try and get investment in green energy. We saw the Prime Minister meet Xi Jinping, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister might visit next year. Do you think that that's a sensible approach?
Yes, I do. I think it's important that Britain recognises realities. When I worked on the Labour manifesto in 1997, I know that seems like a bygone age maybe to some of your viewers, but the British economy was larger than the Chinese economy in 1997. I mean, to state the obvious, the Chinese economy is now many times the size of the British economy. We've got to be a country that stands for engagement with all players in the international scene.
You might know that in terms of that engagement and your party, there's been a bit of a debate in the cabinet about Syria, about the history of the Syria engagement, and some regret from the Health Secretary about what happened in terms of Labour voting down military strikes against the Assad regime, and your brother saying, well, he doesn't regret that, it wouldn't have made much difference as the Trump strikes show. Who do you think is right in that debate?
Well, it's always tempting to wade into alleged cabinet squabbles, if that's what you're describing, but I honestly don't know what you're talking about in terms of the argument or not that's going on. So you'll have to forgive me for not being ready to wade into that.
Thanks very much for joining us, David Miliband.
Thanks a lot, Faisal.
Some fraternal diplomacy there. Now, in the last few days, we've had rows over public sector pay settlements, threats of strikes and warnings of cuts to civil service numbers, and lots of ambitious-sounding building plans for hundreds of thousands of new homes and a new green energy grid today. But also today came the news the government, perhaps they didn't want to hear really, Britain's economy shrinking by 0.1% in October. And does that mean even tougher decisions coming down the track? So, Joe, let's ask you about some of that stuff. You know, the interesting thing about these figures is that they're about kind of October. A lot of people sort of blaming the budget, but they happen sort of before the budget. But maybe some of the rhetoric that we heard, the sort of doomy pitch rolling, has affected the economy.
I think, you know, we've had a difficult period. I think, you know, the economy's taken time to recover from Liz Truss's mini budget.
It's a long way off now, though. 2 years.
Whether this is doom-mongering, I'm not sure. I think, you know, for workers, they're more worrying about the money that's in their pocket, what they can afford, their mortgages. You know, that's the concern of workers.
OK. Sam, it's controversial to say the feel-good factor is somewhat lacking around Britain right now.
Yeah. And so I spend a lot of my time in different parts of the world, and there is a general consensus that things are not quite right in Great Britain. I think the reality is, as a political party or a prime minister, it's very important to send positive signals to investors.
Vibes.
Yeah, good vibes, exactly. and Keir Starmer has done the complete opposite, and I think that we have some serious challenges as a country, and there doesn't seem to be a semblance of a plan. Now, Keir Starmer is
obviously he's not giving workers vibes either, for what it's worth.
4, 5, 6 months into his administration, and nobody can articulate a vision for this Labour government, which is quite worrying.
You've got green energy grids, you've got hundreds of thousands of new homes, you've got ripping up the planning law, which your party sort of talks about and never did.
Planning, housing, yes, very impressed.
Well, you say yes, but that sounds like a plan to me.
Very, very impressed with the noises that Angela Rayner is making on that. But beyond house building, what else is the plan? How are you going to be able to get the money to pay the salaries that folks that Joe represents want and all that jazz? There is no plan for growth. It just doesn't exist.
I actually think this is a really important point because, we talk about green energy and we talk about, the jobs that would support that. But further education, that is the sector that's going to deliver the type of economic growth that Labour want to see. And we need to see way more investment in that. At the moment, staff in FE are leaving that sector.
So further education, this should clarify for people.
Sorry,
So we're talking sixth form colleges.
Post-16 education.
Okay, right. Yeah. But not necessarily universities.
No, so, where people learn skills. And at the moment, the salaries in further education are so low that if you work in things like construction, you are choosing to leave teaching in the sector because you can earn more working in the actual construction sector. There's a £9,000 pay gap between schools and colleges.
OK, well, let's go to that now then. I mean, academics have been offered between 2.5% and 5.5% in some cases. Obviously, it's a bit disaggregated, isn't it, around the different colleges and universities. But that's the general sense of... and you're asking for a lot more than that. You're asking for restoration, which could mean, 25% pay rise?
Well, so there's two workers that you've covered. University staff, professional service staff, academics, which have currently been offered about 2.5%. It's worth saying, MPs have had 5.5% pay recommended to them and they've accepted it, but it's interesting how the people that keep the country going, whether they teach or others, are supposed to be settling for less. But for our college staff, to go back to them, they haven't been offered anything like that, and they didn't get the 5.5 that teaching staff got. So I don't think it's about just looking at the pay awards that are on the table now, which are substandard. It's about saying the pay of those staff, whether it's university staff, college staff, or other staff, have been eroded now for years and years.
And so one of the narratives of the government coming in was like, well, OK, we're going to solve all this industrial strife, we're going to get the country moving again. I mean, your vision, don't give away, too many secrets, or do if you do want to, is that there is going to be more industrial strife if 2.8% is going to be a typical pay award that we heard for the public sector generally.
Yeah, and I think that Labour, it shouldn't be a debate in this country that having decent living standards, especially when you are in employment, is a gift. And I think that, the Tories have created a big mess, and I think they have to shoulder the blame for that. They left the NHS in crisis, the railways in crisis, living standards lower than ever before, but Labour have to fix it. And 2.8... we've got pay review...
But double digit is something you're going to aim for, basically.
Yeah, of course. But if your pay had been eroded by 25% over the last 14 years, you would be saying you needed that too. And just to go back to college workers, if Labour don't do that, it isn't just about industrial strife. They will not get the economic recovery that they are saying is crucial. Because the training, because people are leaving that sector.
Yeah, I totally agree that further education institutions form really powerful parts of inclusive economies as those anchor institutions that train the folks who can hopefully deliver on the jobs that are created. But the reality is this: we spend public sector debt right now about 97.5% of GDP. We borrowed £96 billion to the year up until October 2024. So as much as I totally agree that we should try our best to pay people as much as we possibly can, the money has to come from somewhere. And we already try to tax, we are taxing businesses through their NIC increases significantly more. We're trying to take money from the Labour government are taking money from farmers, and the numbers still are not adding up. And so there's going to need to be
it's shrinking the state, basically.
A much more radical approach for us to invest.
Much more radical. Are you a fan of the Doge, the Elon Musk?
Well,
take $2 trillion out of the. Are you talking like much more radical?
The reality is we spend a lot in terms of as a public service, on public services. 45p of every pound spent in this country is spent through our public services. So when people say, oh, the Tories cut this, the Tories cut that, there has been record levels of expenditure in our National Health Service over the last 14 years. So the reality is money is being spent and people still want more to be spent. And so we have to ask ourselves some critical questions. And some of that will be around if we want to invest more in higher education or further education, what are the trade-offs? What are the things that we're going to have to stop spending money on? And unless we want to have that honest conversation, we're just going to keep going around in circles.
I think focusing on the expenditure doesn't tell the full story, though. It's the services that they've run into the ground. It's money that's been spent wastefully. You know, we could talk about special educational needs and the amount of money that, rather than going to students and to institutions and to staff, is being sent on, sending children to private schools or sending children, around and about in transport because the Tories failed to invest properly in education. It's the same in the NHS. So I think it's a really flawed argument to say investing more isn't the answer. I think, we have in the UK a dual problem of corporation tax not being high enough. High earners could be taxed more. And we also have a problem.
Sure, I'll give that.
Well,
the top rate of tax
bear
is
with me. I heard you out.
45%.
We also have a problem, that we have some of the most restrictive trade union laws in the world.
Well, they're getting rid of some of that stuff.
Yeah, but Labour need to be bolder on this as well, because if you look at the UK, we really struggle in being able to organise quickly and fight employers. And
that's because they want employers to invest.
No, because
they want employers.
Keep fighting employers and you don't have any. Corporation tax is
I think if
high.
I'm intrigued. I want to pick you up again on this idea. You've been to some faster growing parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Does Britain look ambitious right now?
Totally not. Where's the ambition? If you are a business,
you could take that different ways, couldn't you? Because you could say, lower taxes, lower regulation is the argument you're making here, but
not just
in terms of infrastructure and things like
not just
training and educating.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just about being competitive around corporation tax, though that's important. It's not just about being very competitive around things like national insurance contributions, etc. It is also about investing in skilled workforce. It is also about making sure you have a clear plan for the skills of tomorrow. These are all the things that are missing. It is when people say if you're conservative.
And if you want to carry on watching Newsnight, please turn over to BBC Two or watch on iPlayer.
Do stay with us here on BBC News for all the latest headlines in the US and around the world from the team here in Washington. I'm Katrina Perry in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. Syrians take to the streets to celebrate the downfall of the Assad regime as rebel leaders urge people to express joy. The Israeli military says it's investigating after a surgeon was shot and killed in Gaza as it continues airstrikes across the Strip. Prince Andrew says he ceased all contact with a businessman accused of being a Chinese spy after receiving advice from the government. Hello and welcome to World News America. Thousands of Syrians have taken to the streets of cities across the country to celebrate the downfall of the Assad regime on what's being called Victory Day. Images from Damascus and other cities show people celebrating nearly a week after the ousted president fled to Moscow following a surprise opposition offensive. It was the first Friday prayers since rebel groups took power, with people urged to go out and express their joy. It comes as Israel stations troops inside a UN-patrolled buffer zone separating Israeli and Syrian forces in the occupied Golan Heights. The office of the Israeli Defense Minister said troops could stay there throughout the winter. Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, reports now from Damascus.
This ancient city has seen countless upheavals over 5 millennia. For modern Syria, though, with its old flag restored, nothing matches the fall of the Assads. The end of the first week without an Assad in charge since 1970 brought thousands of Syrians into the Umayyad Mosque to thank God for their deliverance. The chant is the people want the execution of Bashar. The regime's collapse and liberation from Assad's brutal security state are powering a sense of great optimism.
For all the people here, this puts the seal on it. This is absolute proof that they have won and the regime has gone. Just flying one of these black, white and green flags a couple of weeks ago could have got you arrested, jail time, or even a bullet.
The fighters of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, are still basking in their achievement. That white flag, used by Syrian Islamist fighters, was also behind the new prime minister in a broadcast. HTS insists it's renounced its former extremist ideology. Some Syrians do not believe them. Samir, overwhelmed, back from Britain after 44 years, is hoping for a tolerant future.
This is our country. This is not Al-Assad country. He's gone now. I don't know how we are going to rebuild it. He has been corrupting this country for 50 years, but this is the people that was going to build the country. So wish us the luck, everyone in the world, and please, please leave us alone. Leave us alone, okay? We appreciate your support, but we don't want anyone to interfere with our decisions, what we are going to do. This is their decision.
Syria's future is full of challenges. HTS is an Islamist group. What will that mean for girls and for women? How do Syrians get justice for the regime's crimes? They meant it when they called for Bashar's execution before the prayer. Their new rulers told them to celebrate the Blessed Revolution, so they did. Syrians understand that it won't be easy to overcome 50 years of dictatorship and 14 years of war. But this was a day to seize and enjoy. Thousands converged on Umayyad Square in the center of Damascus. It's as if an enormous weight has been lifted off a nation. I have never seen so many smiling people in Syria.
We are free. We are feeling. We are free. We are feeling the feeling of free. We never were free like this.
I want all the world to see us. We are free now.
We are free now.
And where are the south, north? We are free.
The fighters are the heroes now, bringing their kids, posing for photos with other people's. But when the party's over, people need to eat in an economy smashed by war and corruption. I asked Ibdi Halaunot and her daughters what they need.
Just needed freedom to do. No taxes, no stolen money taken from us.
Just we want to be independent. We want to be an independent people. Syria is an independent country. Nobody controls us. Nobody can rule us, but just the Syrians themselves.
It's too soon for firm answers to Syria's problems, but the placards set an agenda. Bring the Assads to justice, civil rights for all, and Syria is for every Syrian, no matter who they are. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Damascus.
The US military has flown American Travis Timmerman out of Syria, where he was imprisoned by the Assad regime for 7 months. Mr. Timmerman was attempting to pass through the country as part of what he described as a spiritual journey before he was detained. The 29-year-old was among thousands of prisoners released by rebel forces after the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime on Sunday. The notorious prisons have been described by human rights groups as a slaughterhouse. Elsewhere, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making diplomatic rounds, urging countries in the region to support a peaceful transition of power in Syria. It's his 12th visit to the Middle East since the war between Israel and Hamas erupted last year. During an unannounced visit to Iraq earlier today, Mr. Blinken met with the Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani in Baghdad in a coordinated effort to work with a key regional partner to fight extremism.
As Syria transitions from the Assad dictatorship to hopefully a democracy, it does so in a way that, of course, protects all of the minorities in Syria, that produces an inclusive non-sectarian government, and does not become in any way a platform for terrorism.
Well, joining me live now to discuss the developments in the region is Basima Al-Hussein, Executive Director of the Middle East Policy Council. Thanks for being with us on BBC News. We've seen there these scenes of joy in Syria, but it's also a time of great uncertainty. What is the priority as you see it now for rebuilding and stabilizing Syria?
That is an excellent question. And for many years, the legitimate economy of Syria has been absolutely decimated due to extreme sanctions placed on the country, justifiably. And so what that has meant is that a very robust drug trafficking, Black market economy has really erupted. Specifically, there's one drug called Captagon that's really been taking off throughout the entire Middle East, but its source is Syria. And so it's going to be quite a transition from mostly a Black market economy to back being on the open market.
And we heard from some of the people speaking there earlier in our program that, you know, Syria is for Syrians, it's for Syrians to build themselves and lead themselves now. But given what you're saying there, is there a role for an outside partner, for the international community?
Oh, well, certainly Syria will very much need the support and help of the international community, because Syria, not Syrians, were very much alienated by the international community via these sanctions because of Bashar al-Assad's actions. And so now that he is no longer a factor, the international community is excited to re-engage with the Syrian people and help to revitalize their economy, but it will certainly be a process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight.
And in terms of the interim prime minister, obviously with the HTS party, which some of those international partners, you know, consider to be a terrorist organization, a proscribed organization, as the US government does and many others. What's your view of what you've seen so far of what that leadership, that coalition is going to mean for Syria?
Well, it's very concerning. When we look at other countries in the region, for example, Afghanistan, when the Taliban took over, they also denounced extremism and claimed to be embracing more of a moderate political agenda. And then as time has gone by, we've seen that they are, in fact, clearly as extreme as they ever have been. And so HTS is certainly concerning. And with all of these different kind of revolutionary acts throughout the Middle East or failed state situations in the Middle East, the question is really, is what comes after? Is it going to be better or is it going to be worse? And there's always a risk that it can be worse. It's in very rare instances that a revolution leads to a smooth transitional government. So it's really going to take a lot of effort on the part of very smart people to ensure that Syria succeeds and does not become a failed state.
And just a last question briefly, if you can, in that point of the wider region. I mean, we see Israel marking out what it's calling a buffer zone in a UN-controlled area. What do you make of that?
Well, Israel, for the most part, has a very strong pattern in its history of acquiring land and not returning it. Israel, for decades, has claimed, legitimate interests in the Golan Heights. There is language among different political groups within Israel that part of Syria is actually part of what is called Greater Israel. And so while a buffer zone might be more palatable to the international community conversations at this time, I do think that the motivations of Israel are more sinister than that.
Okay, well, it's early days in the process, so we'll wait to see what happens with Syria and the region. Of course, Bassima Al-Hussein, Executive Director of the Middle East Policy Council. Thanks for joining us on BBC News.
Thank you for having me.
Well, in Gaza, the Hamas-run health ministry says more than 80 people have been killed in Israeli attacks in the past day as international efforts to secure a ceasefire continue. At least 30 people were killed in an Israeli air raid on a post office that was functioning as a shelter for displaced Palestinians. In northern Gaza, a Palestinian surgeon has been shot dead as he travelled from one hospital to another in Jabalia. Israel does not allow foreign journalists unrestricted access to Gaza, so John Donnison reports now from Jerusalem.
Already injured in a previous attack, this is Dr. Saeed Judah speaking.